You're listening to Morning Motivation with Matthew. Morning Motivation is a podcast that helps you focus on setting your week in motion. Each episode, we'll dive into topics focused on being and remaining motivated. Regardless of what stage you are in life, we need men who are now more committed than ever and dedicated to not giving up, not just for those around you, but for yourself. We want you to live a life fulfilled and not allowing 10 or 15 years to go by wishing you've achieved that goal you had. Look, I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but what I can tell you is that I'm fighting to keep it together. I decided to start this journey into podcasting based on life lessons and gleaning from mentors who've helped me every step of the way. Remaining motivated is more than just saying you're motivated. It's a choice followed by an action. A choice to get out of bed every morning, not knowing what the day will hold. A choice to continue holding down the family and supporting everyone else mentally, emotionally, financially, and physically. Remaining motivated is knowing that regardless of your current situation, you are dedicated to achieving success and inspired by those around you who are making it happen. I'll be sharing my own stories and life experiences. Along the way, I'll have guests who can share insight and resources geared to helping us remain motivated together. I'm sure not all will agree, and I'm sure I'm bound to have some hiccups along the way. What I can promise is we will grow together while remaining motivated, all while keeping it together. Good morning, family. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Morning Motivations with Matthew. We have a special guest, um, my best friend in the whole wide world, literally and figuratively, the one and only Ciji Gamble. And today we are going to be talking a little bit to kind of pick up where we left off with overcoming fear. And I'll just share a little bit of context that the reason why I asked my wife to come on as my first guest is because, her and I having did life together for the last 12 years, almost 13 years. Um, I'm still a young spring chicken. um, However, I know that she knows firsthand just having spent some time talking about my last podcast with overcoming fear, and obviously, given that we are connected at the hip, literally, I know that and have heard many of her own stories about how she's actually overcome fear as well. Um, Before we get started with CG, I want to just share with you all, just based on the context from the last podcast, is that I want to simply remind you what I've reminded you before, is that fear is meant to cripple you if you allow it. But the one thing that I want you to remember most is that fear is temporary. When you decide that you are no longer going to allow fear to stronghold you, is when you begin to build the strength and the determination and the momentum to keep going and to do things that would have otherwise caused you to be uncomfortable, and or to be able to go against, right, the things that we all have allowed people to keep us from doing in life. And so, two things to remember: fear is meant to cripple you if you allow it, but more importantly, fear is temporary. All right. So, introducing my lovely queen, Miss CG Gamble. CG, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Ciji Gamble. I'm a counselor, a mom, a wife. Um, what else would you like me to share, honey?
Now, y'all, I was gonna say I'm not gonna boast, but I am gonna boast. Um, because I got a smart lady right here beside me. Talk to me, or share with the people. So you mentioned that you're a counselor,
Yes.
but let's go beyond that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about your career. Like,
Okay.
what have you done in life, right? That qualifies you to kind of talk about fear. No, I'm just kidding. What have you done in life?
I think what you are alluding to is I actually got my undergraduate degree
Uh-huh.
in applied engineering with a business supply chain minor from Michigan State University. Go green, go
Go
white.
green, go white in the building.
Uh, I had internships at 3M, at Harley Davidson, at Consumers Energy at first, and then I worked for International Truck and Engine after college. That is the company that makes the semi trucks that you see with the diamonds in the front and school buses. So, all those school buses with the diamond in the front, I worked for that company for 2 years in their rotational program. And then I made the jump and leap to resign from corporate America to pursue my master's in counseling psychology. Worked in private practice right out of my master's degree, specifically with a group. And then I jumped off the deep end to do my own solo private practice.
All right. So it's a lot to unpack there. Y'all, ain't she just so smart? She just smart. Um, so I remember you talking a little bit about your journey from being a engineer
Mm-hmm.
to a counselor. And I remember you said something vividly because we've had many talks about this, and you mentioned how you wanted to go from solving what is it like
Tech problems.
tech problems to solving
People
people
problems.
problems,
Mm-hmm.
and how you jump from engineering to counseling. So we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit more. But you also mentioned that currently today you're a counselor. So share a little bit more about that.
Okay. So when I was working for corporate and engineering, it was more like business supply. I didn't have a passion for it. It was a wonderful check. However,
It was a wonderful check 15 years ago.
it was hopefully with inflation, it would have been double that now. But for a 20-year-old, making her own money, it was more than satisfactory. And so I knew it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. I knew it was not a vocation. I was unfulfilled, and I was not. It was just not the right role. So at one point, I had to make the decision: am I going to continue to live this way? It made amends. It definitely supported me and could continue, but it was not my vocation. And I wanted
Mhm.
my vocation. I wanted a fulfilled, purposeful role. So I quit. No job. Moved in with my sister, and I love her dearly. Worked at the YMCA.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then believed in myself enough to apply and get into the master's program.
Mhm. She said believed in herself enough to apply as if she couldn't get in. But that's another story. So, made the decision to resign from corporate America
Mm-hmm.
in engineering, making upwards of 40 plus $1,000 a year, all the way to quitting, coming back home,
Mm-hmm.
and working at the
The YMCA.
YMCA.
Yes.
Talk about faith and believing in yourself. Talk about what led up to you deciding to actually quit. Like what was the experience? What was that like to kind of go through that?
Um, well, I'll try to summarize it a little bit.
Yep, she's very long-winded, y'all. She's very long-winded.
um,
The short version, honey.
well, that's going to be difficult, but I'm going to do my best. So, initially, when I worked in the rotational program, I was in Chicago. I have friends there. It was a lively city, but my next rotation was in Conway, Arkansas. And when you get time for quiet, because there's nothing to do in Arkansas for me, but I lived in Little Rock, and there was nothing but your thoughts and you. And so when you get quiet, truth comes. And I could start to see the truth that I was unfulfilled. And then after I was in Arkansas, I went to Fort Wayne, Indiana, a little bit closer to home, but still too far to have community. And so uh, I would go to work and be counting down the minutes to lunch. I would get back from lunch, be counting down the minutes to come go home. And that's not a way to live. And so I remember typing up a resignation letter and basically stating that if they placed me in Chicago, then I would stay because I knew that I could continue life, have fun, things of that nature. But they were trying to send me to Texas. And the realization is that's not where I wanted to be. But I was too afraid to put in my resignation at that point. So I remember driving home, tears in my eyes, all the way from meeting with my supervisor to getting home. And I sat on that couch and I felt like it was life or death. And the realization is me staying at that job, it's not a death, but it's a death of joy. It's a death of spiritual fulfillment. It's and just to think about all of the women that I've touched and all of the babies that have been born that had stable mothers. Those were all individuals that would not have been impacted by me or my practice. So I resigned. Very humbling. But I think that summarizes it.
um, what? Let's talk a little bit about what is fear specifically to you.
Fear is not trying. Because realization is everything can be scary if you haven't tried it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but when you try it, you're at first you probably will suck,
Mm-hmm.
but it's continuing and believing that you'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
So fear to me is just not trying.
I like that. I like that. Fear is not trying. Speaking of fear and not trying, I told CJ I was going to talk about this, but I remember when, for years, you all heard the story in the last episode where I shared, Ciji was in her career field. She had a master's degree or was working towards a master. I think she was actually done with the master's degree at this time, wrapping up the master's degree. I was in school off and on. We had just had a babe. Well, I was in school off and on. She finished school, right, in 2012. I decided to go back to school, I guess kind of full time in 2012. I really still wasn't that serious about it, but decided to go back to school a little while after she graduated. Did okay. I was like, forget it. But then she, for years, had talked about after she got her degree, and she worked in for various universities throughout Kalamazoo, where she said that she wanted to quit working for where she was working at. And I'm like, no, we can't do this, homegirl. I was still working in the mental health field at the time. We hadn't had our son just yet, but I'm like, no, that's not gonna work. And then I went back to work, right? And she continued to talk about the idea of not working. She was working at a place. She wanted to do something different. She went over to another place, and she was like, okay, after this, I'm quitting. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. Now, thank God, in the midst of all of that, I was able to get a really good position, a really good opportunity. It kind of really excelled my career at my employer, but at the same time, I was like, no, no, I don't think it's right. I don't think we should go that route. We're not really financially stable. Although we were doing fairly decent, we were doing better than what we had done in years. And she kept pushing the envelope. And I remember we were pregnant, or she was pregnant rather, with our last son, and she said, when I have birth, I'm not coming back here. And at that point in time, although I had resisted it for so long, I was settled. She said, I'm going to save up maternity leave for 2 months,
3.
3 months. I'm gonna save up maternity leave. In the midst of all of this, she's still working full time or working at her W-2. She's in private practice for at least 2 years or so at that particular point in time. And she's like, when I have this baby, I'm not going back. So she committed and she created a plan for herself to say, look, I can show you better than I can tell you. A part of me was like, I don't know if this is really going to work, but I'm like, I'm going to trust the process. She saved the money that she needed. When she had that baby, I remember the day that she went into labor. I was at work. That day on our menu board, we had fried chicken, spaghetti,
Spaghetti.
and garlic bread. I had come home from work. She was home with my son cooking and experiencing some what was active labor,
I didn't know it,
although
but
she didn't know it at the time. And she had that baby and she literally did not go back. Um,
Mm-mm.
no different than me telling her when we had our son a few years prior, like, look, I don't think I can do this anymore. So I love how you said fear is not trying, because a part you didn't necessarily have any fear about leaving because you was
No.
like, look, I making money for me is not an issue. That's not an issue for me.
The fear was, can I do private practice? It
Mm,
wasn't, but I had already done private practice.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think part of it is okay. So for me in that situation, fear was, am I going to start? It wasn't the finish, it's the start.
mhm.
So initially, I was fearful of starting my own solo private practice.
Yeah, let's get to that.
But once it was started and I saw what I was able to do, then I had settled in my mind that I can do this. So
Yeah.
everything else was like, okay, how do we implement it?
Mhm.
The strategy comes after the start.
Yeah.
I mean, we plan in the beginning, but most of the learning is when you are actually in it.
Mhm.
And so sometimes we have to be patient with ourselves.
Mhm.
Patient with ourselves to allow ourselves enough evidence that you can do it.
Mm.
So for
She
me,
talking to me right now, y'all.
so me, it's always scary to start, but once I have enough evidence, I have enough proof that I can do it.
Mm.
It's not scary anymore once you got little proof.
Mhm. Mhm. That's good. That's good. She's talking to me because we just had a conversation about me in grad school. However, no, I like that. You said that it wasn't it right. It was the strategy was already worked out, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
was the fear is, can you do it, right?
Yeah.
Can you continue on? Let's talk a little bit about you overcoming the fear. And we're kind of unpacking a lot of stuff here. And I'm gonna get to my questions that I have for CJ in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit about what got you to the point of starting private practice. So I'll just share that for years I had been telling CG that she would do well in private practice. And for years, she refuted it and was
Yes.
like, I don't want to run or operate anything. I want to be able to go in, serve my clients, meet their needs, not have to worry about billing. I can do the notes. I don't have to worry about marketing. I don't have to worry about overhead, and I can keep pushing. And I'm like, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Talk to us a little bit about what got you to that point, and was there some fear outside of the logistics and the operation behind it that prevented you from going into private practice a lot sooner?
Um, no, I think you hit on everything that I didn't want to do, that I was fearful about doing, because at the particular group practice I was in, the owner of it would kind of handle the business out where all the clinicians were, where we all gathered. So I saw all the work that he put into it, and he did it with excellence. And so I was like, man, I don't want to spend that extra time. I was already working a W-2. I was already, seeing clients after or on the weekends or something of that nature. And so I was like, I think that's gonna be too much. So I was scared of the over. working. What got me to that point, which honestly was kind of the same thing when I resigned, was I hit a wall where it was like it was no longer acceptable for me to be in that position. And so Matthew knows, but I'll share. I remember it was Christmas and I got a $25 check. You heard that right, $25 from seeing clients, and that was not okay for me. And so because of that, it helped me learn much more about billing, learn more about the systems. I started taking ownership of understanding things a little bit more in private practice. And once you start understanding again, it doesn't seem so scary. So, just as when I resigned, I was put against the wall. I wish
Mm-hmm.
that's something maybe to reflect on, is that sometimes people get to this wall and then it's a choice. It's no
Mm-hmm.
longer that it's more scary to stay than it is to go into something new.
Mm-hmm.
So for that international truck and engine job, it was more scary to stay there
Mm-hmm.
and be dead spiritually than it was to take that leap to resign. When it was time to start private practice, it was more scary for me to stay and not understand how to do a solo private practice,
Mm-hmm.
because my desire was to be able to spend more time with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that, I can't have a W 2 and see clients.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more scary to stay and never be able to save enough money to spend more time with my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. You mentioned your experience with Check Out International in mentioning dying spiritually. How has um, your spiritual experience, awakening with God, relationship with God, all meshed into one, how has that shaped how you have dealt with and or deal with fear?
That's kind of deep. Um, how does it kind of go with fear? I don't know. I'll just take it from this perspective. I He's my evidence. I the parable that in the Bible that I love the most is Gideon, because he asked over and over and over again, like, okay, God, if you're with me, then I need this sign. And then he'd get the sign, and then he'd be like, okay, God, if you really with me, then I need these, the people that's going to be with me to drink a certain way. And I mean, like, he asked over and over again. That tells me I'm okay to get reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, um, it's making sure that I have his reassurance throughout it. And if
Mm-hmm.
I don't, it's harder to do. So
Yeah, yeah, that's good. How has fear shaped your life?
fear made me go into a role that I was not supposed to go into, i.e., international truck and engine.
Mm, I didn't even think about that story.
Yeah.
What caused you?
Well, when I was 16, my father passed away. He was very much a financial breadwinner, and our finances changed quite a bit when I was 16. And so from there, I was like, I knew I was smart. I knew I could do math with a calculator. I knew that, I could go and I could be an engineer or work in business. And because of that, I knew that's where what I thought the money was. So in order to not um, you know, go into financial distress again, I sought after an occupation that honestly wasn't for me. Hindsight 2020, my mom always said, "See, you should be a counselor." And I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now I'm a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
But the realization is I sought being an engineer because I was fearful of having financial strain.
Mm, right. Um, Talk about how you've overcome areas in your life. Well, you've already talked a little bit about how you've overcome areas in your life with dealing with fear. I think we kind of talked about that quite a bit. Any words of wisdom that you would share with our listeners as it relates to overcoming fear? And then if there's any way that you can incorporate, you know, the purpose of the podcast for both men and women, because, although the podcast is quote unquote centered around men, it's important as a spouse, right, as a woman, whether married, not married, friend, sister, brother, cousin, whomever you are, to be able to hear from different perspectives, right? So that's why my wife is here. She's another perspective. Share with the people like some words of wisdom from your own personal experience, because you've layered a lot and talked about a lot about your own experiences with fear. But share with some words of wisdom as it relates to overcoming fear and remaining motivated, even in dealing with fear.
In regards to motivation, you know, what I would share with that is that don't look at other people. Please don't look at other people, because other people have their own path. And even if it looks like we're walking the same way, we actually have different destinations. And so, in regards to motivation, is keep your eyes focused on what you're doing, not on what everybody else is doing, because their path is different. The next thing in regards to overcoming fear is just, really just do it. Just start it. Just really try. Now, I am a person that believes in wisdom. Wisdom is a principal thing. Wisdom is do it, but also listen for the strategy. So, how does your faith come into it? It's okay, God, what's the next step? What's the right next step? Not like you have to have the whole thing. We always talk about write the vision, make it plain. We make these beautiful vision boards, but the vision board doesn't get you there. It's the everyday step. And so asking God, what is that everyday step? So do it scared. But at this point, I think for both of us, we've had to do some things very much like jumping off the cliff, do some things. Now we're able to jump off the cliff, but rather we do it with a parachute. So it's like, okay, do it, but how can you do it and have financial income? How can you do it and be able to provide security or make sure that you have what you need? So make sure that you just have a strategy behind it after you start.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, family, uh, you have taken a lot. I've taken a lot from my wife as she sat here with me and even looked at my eyes while she was speaking to me directly on multiple occasions. But she's provided a lot of insight into overcoming fear and some of her own obstacles that she's had to navigate through as it pertains to fear. And let this be a lesson to you all to just do it, just start it, right? Even in the midst of dealing with the fear, right? Just do it. You don't know, right? Whether or not you will or won't succeed if you don't try, right? So I'm living that every day. Every week I do another podcast, I'm living that. And just like I shared last week, I may not be everybody's cup of tea, but that's okay, because the Lord has told me to keep doing it. I know I am.
You're mine.
I know I am. So thank you all so much, family, for listening. We love you all, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Yeah, have a good day, and thank you so much for listening to Morning Motivations with Matthew.